Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, or maybe even good evening, wherever you are in this world. Welcome to today's RAVENNA webinar on remote production in real life. Thank you for joining in. My name is Andreas Hildebrand. I'm working for ALC Networks out of Munich, and we are developing and maintaining the RAVENNA IP media networking technology. We have a guest today presenting this webinar. The guest will be Dirk Sykora from Lawo. Dirk is acting as technical sales manager out of Benelux, Belgium. He's basically passionately working as an audio engineer for more than 20 years, has a strong background in live studio and of course broadcast. And since his first Lawo experience in 2004 at the Olympic opening ceremony in Athens, he's an enthusiastic Lawo fan. He also founded the Lawo office in Benelux in 2013. Well, about Lawo, I don't have to tell you much actually. Hello, Dirk, welcome. Lawo is is an international acting company. They are a leading solution provider for professional broadcast technology. They are based with the headquarters in Rastatt in the southwest of Germany. They started back in 1970 as an engineering office and now are one of the major manufacturers of digital mixing consoles, routing systems, and video solutions, as well as turnkey systems. And as such, they have grown into the position of a reliable partner for TV and radio stations, production companies, theaters, and also event organizers. They have branches in quite a number of countries, including Benelux, the US, Switzerland, Asia, Singapore, and UK, and they have sales partners in more than 40 countries. So far, for today's guest, remote production in real life. Remote production, that's a term you hear more and more in the last few months, of course. It's a buzzword, it's a sales term. What does it really mean to install a remote production environment and use this technology for daily production? Well, Dirk will provide a detailed overview on selected remote production installations Lawo has recently executed. And that includes, as far as I understand, a project from the sports industry, news environment, and it includes a regional and intercountry wide area network connectivity project from a host broadcaster. Well, in this presentation, he will guide us through the story of technical needs, install solutions, and of course of the productional consequences. And at the end, hopefully you will understand how a real-life remote production works and how it opens up possibilities which were not even conceivable without powerful wide area network infrastructure and equipment a few years ago. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dirk, who should be able to take it from there. Dirk, it's up to you.
Thank you, Andreas. Like already mentioned by Andreas, I'm going to explain today during the upcoming 40-45 minutes 3 case studies of 3 projects which I installed personally. During the presentation, I will give like a more high-level presentation, actually trying to get everybody in this presentation at the same level. And then, of course, at the end, there will be the Q&A session during which I can explain even very detailed technical questions if required. The 3 case studies will exist out of a football installation, then secondly, an interlink between multiple countries with a permanent installation. Last but not least, also the installation of a complete infrastructure handling a daily news here in Belgium. Apart from that, I just want to explain how I'm going to do the presentation. First, I will always explain the goal of the project. Then I will explain how we actually implemented it on a technical level. And then, of course, last but not least, it's always important to share with you the difficulties which we faced during the installation of the project and a solution which was installed to overcome those difficulties. First, first project which I would like to explain is actually the football installation, a football installation which we did here in Belgium. Funny enough, it all started with the Euro in France in 2016. On that event, Lawo installed a full IP remote system with interconnectivity between the IBC in Paris and all football stadiums shared all over the country. And here in Belgium, we have a company called Proximus, which is actually a telco provider, and they visited the installation in France, and they were quite keen on the technology that they actually discovered back there, and so they contacted us with the request to give some more insights on that solution. As a result, there was a request for a remote production in Belgium to set up, and that was already back in 2016, so already a couple of years ago. But I felt it was nice to give you the introduction from the early days of remote production. So like already mentioned, Proximus came with the request to set up that remote production. It is a telco provider in Belgium. The big advantage is that they do have network connectivity. And apart from that, they were the right holder back then on the football rights for first and second division in Belgium. Important is in this whole story, and that's quite nice. It was not purely just Proximus that could provide the complete solution. They actually provided the network, Lawo provided the technology, but on top of that, we also started a quite good and deep cooperation with two broadcast companies, being Video House and NEP. And they actually provided cameras, microphones, and crew on site. So that is actually quite nice to see in this cooperation that back then in 2016, it started actually as a team with Proximus, Lawo, Video House, and NEP. The goal of the project, well, actually, what was the goal of the project? The goal of the project was to start a remote production for the second division football matches. And the idea was actually to have a connection between Brussels, where the central site of Proximus is located, and the football stadiums all over the country. Now, for second division, the matches are not that big. They're actually rather small on a technical level. And the idea was to have 6 cameras on site, to install 2 commentary positions, and also have all audio and intercom connectivity between Brussels and between the independent football stadiums. Of course, for a first division football match, this would not be big enough, but for the second division in Belgium, this was already sufficient to cover the football matches on a weekly basis. Here you can actually see that the intention was as well to cover not only 1, but to cover 2 football matches at the same time. So of course, there are in Belgium more than 2 football stadiums, but the intention was to cover 2 games at the same time, at the same time, setting up similar feeds towards Proximus in Brussels. So the idea was actually to have 2 control rooms running 2 complete remote productions, being it on the audio side and on the video side, and having 2 teams on site in the stadium, camera teams, audio teams, commentary positions, and everything running simultaneously. How did we do that? It's not the intention to give you a complete explanation on the devices, but I just quickly wanted to mention that back then in 2016, we used a VRemote for that. And what is a VRemote? It's one of Lawo's early video devices. It's a device which can do audio and video streaming. It can stream video in a compressed or in a non-compressed way. And it has on the back a redundant 10 gig and a multiple 1 gig connections. Then apart from that, you see on the back side some SDI connections. We do have some MADI connections. And this box was actually fit to do the job. So what did we do? We installed on the stadium side, we actually installed a flight case, and we built that flight case in the following way. We installed 2 pieces of VRemote, and we installed also some small analog preamps, with the AMIC 8. Now, all of this, and you can see the picture on the right side of the flight case on the screen, and on the left side you can see like a basic principle schematic. How did we actually hook all of that up? Well, quite simple. We hooked up the 2 devices of the VRemote straight onto a small Sykora switch in the flight case, just with a 1 gig connection. Because, and that's important to understand, the telco provider Proximus only had to the 2nd division football stadiums a standard 1 gigabit connection. So there was no availability of, let's call it, a high bandwidth infrastructure. You would expect at least like a 10 gig connection. But in this case, it was purely based on the existing infrastructure of Proximus, which is a 1 gig connection. I'll come back on that in a second. So in the stadium side, we actually built this flight case, and this flight case was containing 2 pieces of VRemote and 3 pieces of AMIC. Now, why was that? On every single device of a VRemote, we are able to hook up to 4 independent video sources. In the stadium, the original request was to have 6 cameras, and that's also what the operational teams on site would install on a weekly basis. However, imagine that there would be an issue with one of the 2 devices. We actually decided to split up the video signals directly from the camera in the stadium. So actually the CCU boxes, the camera control boxes, they actually gave camera 1 and 2 to both devices. By doing that, we actually could feed camera 1, 2, 3, and 4 with 1 device, and we could feed camera 1, 2, 5, and 6 with the second unit. All of those feeds were then being transmitted towards the network using J2K compression. J2K compression, which is a video codec which can compress video, and we actually configured the streams to pass per video stream, not to pass the bandwidth of 100 megabit. So by doing that, we could actually stream the camera feeds with a compressed format of 100 megabit towards Brussels. On top of that, we also needed to have some monitoring in the stadium, because of course the guys in the stadium needed to receive some return feeds. They needed to see the program which was created in Brussels. And not only for the camera people we needed this return feed, but also for the commentary positions which were installed in the stadium as well. Then on top of that, we needed to have the audio connections, not just for the microphones around the field, but for microphones, commentary positions, and intercom 4-wire connectivity. And then last but not least, we also hooked up on this network, on this little switch in the flight case, we hooked up the complete control of the cameras, since the shading, the camera control, was located in Brussels as well. If we then take a quick look at the site in Brussels, then and that's the very important part of this whole explanation. The site in Brussels was already equipped with 2 complete production galleries. So here is a picture from the existing production gallery in Brussels, but that was not built for this remote production. It was already an existing infrastructure in Brussels, and the intention from Proximus after visiting the Euro setup in France was actually to have like a real quick implementation, and they actually came with the first requests end of June, beginning July, with the intention to have the full remote production up and running for the first game beginning of August. And we succeeded to do so. On the right side, you can actually see the schematic, and maybe nice to see here is that we have in Brussels 4 pieces of VRemote installed instead of 2. Why is that? Because of the dual games running simultaneously. So one game has in the flight case 2 VRemotes, and they stream up to 8 video feeds into the infrastructure in Brussels. And then, of course, we needed a second pair of 2 VRemotes to receive the feeds from the second football match. By doing that, we could quite easily install those 4 units here in Brussels, hook them up to the existing video infrastructure, which was fully baseband. So the complete infrastructure, it was, they already had like 2 existing production galleries, and those were completely based on baseband. So for us, it was hooking up the 1 gigabit connection to the VRemotes in Brussels, hooking up the control units, the camera controls, the OCP units. And then we also decided not to install additional complex audio connections in Brussels, but just to hook up a MADI from the VRemote straight into the audio matrix from the existing infrastructure. By doing so, they were able to install in less than 1 month the complete infrastructure in Belgium, since it was really low level, not too difficult at all. Now, what was actually the difficulty? The difficulty, and let me explain that on the next slide in detail. The difficulty here was actually the network in between. So on one side, we have on the left side, we have the stadium. On the right side, we have the setup in Brussels. And in the middle, we have a 1 gig network from Proximus. This was based on an existing network, being the MPLS network that they already installed in the complete country. So it was not a dedicated, call it AV network. It was actually trying to get all the streams running over their existing network platform. And that's actually quite an important one to understand. Why? Because normally you would expect to have a network which is providing you with proper quality of service, with proper clocking information, PTP clocking, and so on. But that was not the case at all in this infrastructure. So we had to overcome a few difficulties in this project. First of all, clocking. Clocking was in the beginning really something that we were struggling with in this project. And why was that? The whole network was not able to transport PTP clocking at all. So what did we do? We installed on the right side in Brussels, we hooked up the VRemotes to the blackburst from the building, from the already existing baseband infrastructure. And we locked the VRemotes in Brussels on the existing blackburst. Then we actually decided to stream video streams, compressed video streams, back to the stadium. And what did we do? We actually defined in the software of the VRemote that it would be possible to lock the complete device on an incoming stream. Therefore, it was not needed to have P2P clocking in the network, and we could actually easily completely lock the remote side in the stadium onto that incoming stream. Yeah. Out of that clock, we could then regenerate locally a video ref, which was feeding all the cameras. And by doing that, the cameras in the stadium side were properly locked to the blackburst in Brussels. On top of that, we could generate locally a P2P in the stadium. And why was that needed? It was actually needed to synchronize the audio stage boxes which were used on the stadium side. So we did 2 things for the clocking, or 3 actually. Received a stream from Brussels going to the football stadium, locking ourselves on that incoming multicast, regenerating a blackburst for the cameras, and regenerating a P2P clock, which was then used for the audio stage boxes. The audio stage boxes by themselves, they generated also multicast streams, which were then being transmitted straight to Brussels. and they're converted back into MADI. Why? Because the customer already had an existing infrastructure based on MADI with an existing audio matrix. Control of the whole thing was quite important, because key for this whole project is actually that it can run really very quickly installed, and that we don't need IT personnel on site. That was the whole goal of the project as well. So how did we do that? We actually installed a touchscreen control, which was configured especially for the customer. And like you can see here, we actually had, like, on the opening page of this panel, we had two very simple buttons which were controlled, which were named Regie 1, Regie 2, which in English is Production Gallery 1, Production Gallery 2. And then on the bottom, we had 3 flight cases. From the moment somebody would arrive in a stadium, and if they would hook up the flight case to the MPLS network of Proximus, then we would actually be able in Brussels to detect that. And by doing that, the color of the little logo next to the flight case button would change. And you could see actually that it's actually the logo of Proximus which we used for that. So there you could see, okay, if a flight case is offline, I'm unable to connect it. If a flight case becomes online, I will be able to connect it. By then just simply pressing one button and to say, okay, we hook up the flight case to control room number 2, we would actually set up all the streams between the stadium and between Brussels. Not only that, on top of that, we would also make sure that all the tally information was then transmitted from the video mixer into the right flight case and to send tally information to the camera. Also, all the return feeds, all the intercom connections, because of course it's important that the director would talk to the right people. All of that communication was done with a single click on one button. Now, of course, I don't need to explain that in the background, there is, of course, more detailed technical operations needed, but all of that was done by the control system installed in Brussels. Like already mentioned, we had a few difficulties. The difficulties were first the 1 gigabit connection, which is an MPLS network. And because of that, the network would automatically reroute on a regular basis the packages in the network. And we discovered that actually on a Friday evening, around 9 o'clock, apparently there was a lot of traffic in that network coming from bank transfers. So apparently at 9 p.m., a lot of bank transactions were being pushed over that network, and therefore a lot of connections were being rerouted, which resulted in quite heavy packet loss in the network. But funny enough, because we were using the J2K compression, apparently the codec could handle that packet loss quite good. So we never had any visual impact on air. And it was a very open discussion with Proximus, with the telco provider. We stated like, okay, this network is giving packet loss, so you do have the risk of losing content. But since they were not only the telco provider, but also the right holder, they had an internal decision that this would be sufficient for them, and that for the 2nd division, I'm talking about the 2nd division football, that this would be of no issue. Second, of course, no P2P support, already explained, and I already explained the solution as well. And then, of course, third was the latency for the commentary positions. In the beginning, we tried to mix the commentary positions in Brussels and then send back the return feed and put them in their headphones. In the end, we discovered that for this network and for this connectivity, the latency was actually too high. So in the end, what did we do? We proposed to work with a local monitoring feed into their headphones. That was actually the first part of the presentation. keeping a quick eye on the time. We're quite good in timing. Second explanation is the, let's call it, inter-country connectivity. Now, the inter-country connectivity, what is that about? It's actually about a link that we had to create for the European Council. The European Council, located here in Brussels, but also having buildings in different countries. And one of those countries is Luxembourg. So what was actually the goal of the project? The goal of the project was to be able to control meeting rooms of the complete building in a technical control room in Brussels, but not only the meeting rooms from Brussels, but also the meeting rooms in a different country, being in this case Luxembourg. A little background on this story. In the European Council, we have multiple meeting rooms, like already explained, in Brussels, Luxembourg, and even at different places. And in those meeting rooms, we have on a daily basis the politicians, European politicians, having their daily debates. Now, it is very important and actually a fundamental need for the European Council that they can not only record, but also live transmit every meeting. Yeah, and that is actually one of the fundamental reasons for the it is a fundamental reason that the whole complete technical department exists in the European Council. So I'm not sure if you are aware, but you could actually browse to the website of the European Council and follow on a daily basis every meeting in the building. And that's actually the basic principle of the European law, that all the meetings in those rooms can be followed on a live transmission. Those transmissions are being sent out to the world from Brussels, and they're being streamed on the internet, and also being sent out on satellite. Like already explained, until 2019, the European Council had a technical control room in Brussels. And if they then also had a meeting in Luxembourg, they had to actually send a complete team to Luxembourg to be able to operate the technology, operate the cameras, operate the video switching and everything in Luxembourg. But they had the strong belief that they could simplify this, and therefore they requested and they opened up a tender where companies could come with a technical proposal to interconnect Luxembourg to Brussels and the other way around. And then actually they would be able to only use one technical control room in Brussels and control via long distance all of the meeting rooms in Luxembourg. So how did we do that? We actually proposed to use our VMatrix platform. And just for you guys to know, this installation is installed in 2019, so it's not that old. It's actually an installation which we did last year. We proposed to use the VMatrix platform for that, and the VMatrix platform is, let's say, the bigger brother from the already explained VRemote, and it can also do video and audio streaming. It can do video streaming in a raw way, so non-compressed or compressed, and it has 10 gig or even 40 gig of connectivity per single card. So how did we actually install that system? We installed the system based on a full redundant network. And important to understand is that this was maybe the biggest hurdle we had to take in this project. The biggest hurdle which we took in this project was convincing the IT department from the European Council that we could provide a live transmission over a full redundant 10 gig connection. Because what they knew, what the IT did, I mean, there was like a big difference between, let's call it the broadcast department and between the IT department. And the broadcast department in the European Council, they were convinced that this was the right way to go. However, the IT department was not yet familiar with the technology which we could provide. So before actually installing this complete setup, we had multiple meetings with the European Council trying to explain what we could do and what we could provide as a complete technical infrastructure. So after all those communications and all those explanations, we convinced them that it would be a good idea to install a full redundant way, because that, of course, it had to be redundant in their infrastructure. And we convinced them to install a full redundant network. It's not a secret. I can share the technical informations on that with you. So the network is actually installed based on a full redundant Arista network. So in Brussels, we installed 2 Arista switches, being the 7280 of Arista, and we did the same in Luxembourg. Then the European Council by themselves provided the interlink, the line between Brussels and Luxembourg. And they did that by starting a cooperation with the, funny enough, with the post office in Luxembourg, because apparently the post offices in the post company in Luxembourg have very good fiber connectivity. So the dual 10 gig connectivity was installed and was actually used on the fiber connections from post Luxembourg. Then we actually hooked up that network connectivity, that 10 gig network connectivity on the Arista switches, both in Brussels and in Luxembourg. And as a start, we only installed a single frame with just a single card, both in Brussels and in Luxembourg, from the already explained VMatrix platform. The connection between those frames and the switches were also just a 10 gig link, main and redundant. And what they required as a first step was the transport of 18 video streams in one direction and 2 return paths, so 2 returning videos. Before they actually started to familiarize themselves with our solution, they were using MPEG encoders before the installation of the VMatrix frame. And of course, that's a nice solution. It can compress the video quite high, but what is the disadvantage? It's that there is a huge latency. And what they discovered is that, or what they knew as a normal working solution, is that they would have a latency of multiple seconds before they would see a live action from a camera in Brussels. And of course, like that, it's impossible to do a remote production. So what we showed them was the usage of a video compression. We used back then and still do the VC2 compression, and that is really a low latency compression algorithm. It gives you only 20 video lines, so we're talking about microseconds, 20 video lines of latency for the complete transmission, encoding and decoding of the video feeds. Now, funny enough, and I'll go here to the next slide. So we installed a solution based on a full redundant 10 gig connectivity. Like requested, we had to transmit 18 videos from one side, from Luxembourg to Brussels. And we did that using the VC2 compression, which was compressing the full HD signal into a 250 megabit per stream. So that means that in total, we only consumed 4.5 gigabit of data on the 10 gig connection. Now, in the beginning, we said, okay, and that was per request of the European Council. They said, well, we would like to use as less compression as possible because the quality needs to be as high as possible. But after doing in-depth testing, they noticed that doing a compression of 1 to 2 or a compression of 1 to 4 or even going above 1 to 4 had no difference whatsoever on the quality. So in the end, we decided to compress a full HD signal up to 250 megabit, and therefore only consuming not even half of the 10 gigabit connection. As a result, the IT department decided to install, and that was done just a bit after the installation from the complete video and audio remote production story. They also decided to hook up their office network on the Arista switches. Before, they just had like a single 1 gig connection between Brussels and Luxembourg for daily office use. And now they actually said, okay, we're gonna browse also on the streaming network, on the full red and blue, full redundant network, and therefore we can even dismiss our own 1 gig connectivity. Later on, also the guys decided to install the full intercom onto the existing Arista switches, and that was done using the Riedel intercom system. So on one side in Brussels they have the core, and on the other side they installed the panels and also the wireless Bolero antennas. Last but not least, also important to know is that we locally generate the PTP in Brussels based on GPS, and on the other side we retrieve the PTP out of the network and we recreate video reference out of that to completely lock the complete building in Luxembourg on the building in Brussels. So there is no local GPS receiving device installed in Luxembourg, no Grandmaster in Luxembourg which is receiving GPS and creating PTP out of that. No, it's completely done over the network. So that means that the switches are running in boundary mode. They are locked on a GPS locked PTP master clock. Then in boundary mode, they transport the PTP to Luxembourg. And then in Luxembourg, we lock all the devices on that incoming PTP clock, also regenerate a video reference out of that. What were the difficulties? Like already explained, I think the first reaction of the IT department was a hurdle to take because they, in the beginning, did not really allow to only work fully on IP, and that was the funny thing, purely because they never knew that the, let's call it the broadcast technology was already at that level and could provide a full redundant streaming possibility over those 10 gig connections. Second difficulty was that we discovered that there was actually a symmetrical connection between Brussels and Luxembourg. And I'm not talking about a difference between the red and the blue lane, but I'm talking about the difference between the TX and RX on the same 10 gig connection. Therefore, we actually had to increase some parameters in the network, because in the beginning the switches and also our devices were complaining about the asymmetrical connection between Luxembourg and Brussels. Let's keep an eye on the time. I'll quickly move to the last presentation, and then just keeping an eye on the time here. Last but not least, we have a presentation on a third proposal or a third complete infrastructure which was used for which is using the technology of remote production, and that is actually the daily news, which is installed here in Brussels. Daily news, that's actually being, it's a project that we installed for DPG Media. DPG Media is like a company in Belgium and in the Netherlands and also in the Nordics that is handling the daily news for the country. DPG Media actually bought another company, and that's a little background information. They bought a company which was called Medialaan. So before we had Medialaan in Belgium was responsible for the daily news and TV shows and everything. It's a commercial TV station. and they were then bought by a different company. Now, Medialaan already had all of their infrastructure up and running in Brussels. They had studios, they had control rooms, technical data centers. The complete infrastructure was already installed in Brussels. Now, by the fact that they were actually bought into a bigger group, being DPG Media, there were quite some consequences with that. DPG Media, they decided to build a complete new building, to install a complete new building in Antwerp, different city. And there became a little bit, there was a difficult situation, because what was the intention from DPG Media? To centralize not only the news from Medialaan, but also the daily newspapers that they also own, and to combine all of that into a complete central building in Antwerp and have all of the news gathering being done in that building. Now, of course, there was a bit of a conflict there, because in Brussels, Medialaan already had all of the technical infrastructure. And in Antwerp, in the new building, there was nothing. It was a complete new building without any technical infrastructure. So what was actually the idea? The idea was actually to connect the new building in Antwerp to the existing infrastructure in Brussels, and therefore not to install a complete new broadcast infrastructure in Antwerp, but to use, with a remote production on a daily basis, the complete technical infrastructure from Brussels in the building in Antwerp. Of course, quite logical. It's a broadcast company. They do daily news, so they needed to have full video and audio infrastructure controllable from both sides, and of course with very low latency and superb quality. And that is actually what we installed. They did quite a lot of testing. They had like multiple test weeks where they investigated the possibilities in the market. And in the end, I'm quite happy to say that we installed the complete project. Here is a quick, like a quick summary, a quick schematic of the infrastructure. So on the left side, you have Antwerp, the new city. On the right side, you have Vilvoorde with the data center. And what we actually needed to do was to convert IP to SDI and the other way around, but also to provide multi-viewing in Antwerp, to provide processing, to have audio and video ingests and everything, and that all in a low latency and high quality manner. So therefore, this company, DPG Media, they decided not to use any video compression, but to actually use the complete full raw packages, the raw quality of all audio and video streams. So therefore, they installed a network, which is actually quite a big one. They installed a 400 gigabit network backbone, fully based on a red and a blue, or call it a main and a redundant network infrastructure. A quick look on the backbone of that project. So what they did, they installed in Brussels, they installed a complete redundant network with a redundant spine and leaf architecture, and they connected that onto, call it optical modules from ADVA, which then connected to the other side a full 400 gig network. Then on the side of Antwerp, they just installed leaf switches, which were then hooked up to the spine in Brussels. Yeah, quite similar to the story from the European Council. They actually decided to only have P2P generators and SPGs, the main master clock, the simple generators, to have those installed in Brussels, and to run the complete infrastructure over a boundary clock infrastructure, and therefore to retrieve the P2P clock on the site in Antwerp. Now, if we go a little bit further, and here we're diving a little bit into the deeper technology. What I would like to do here, because I know this is like a picture which is far too small to understand in this presentation, but I'll come back to this in a second. You can see here actually on one side the technical infrastructure on Vilvoorde, and on the other side the technical infrastructure in Antwerp. And what you can see is actually that we also made use of the VMatrix platform on both sides. So we actually installed on one side in Vilvoorde the VMatrix platform to receive all of the streams coming from Antwerp and also to send all the return feeds. And then in Antwerp, we actually decided to install the same VMatrix system, but very important, in the site in Antwerp, there was no technical room available whatsoever. Because it was an empty building, not even meant to have a daily news transmitted from that building. So the building was not constructed with that intention. So there was no data center, no technical rooms, no isolated infrastructure. So in the end, what we had to do, or what we came up with, was to install the VMatrix platform immediately on the news floor. And of course, you would say, oh, that's a bit odd. Now, why was that possible? It was actually possible because those VMatrix frames were based and installed in a silent frame, so they were not generating any noise whatsoever. And by doing that, we could actually hook up the cameras straight on the news floor onto the, let's call it onto the gateway functionality, and from there, with fiber, go straight to the other side, to the infrastructure in Vilvoorde. Now, what were the difficulties? I think this project was on a technical side not too difficult. Why? Because we just got a massive backbone, 400 gig of main and redundant connectivity. But what was here the bottleneck, that was actually that the complete production team that was used to work for many, many years in Brussels actually had to move to Antwerp and to start working from a complete different city and a complete different building to present the daily news, while the technical infrastructure was used and was installed with the complete technical infrastructure already installed in Brussels. So there was like a little split of the team between the productional team and the technical team. The productional team was more located in Antwerp. Technical team, especially in the beginning, had to make sure that all of the technical equipment and all the streams were properly received in Brussels. Then an additional difficulty was that, like already explained, there was no technical room available in Antwerp, and so we actually had to install our equipment almost literally on the news floor. So we had to come up with a silent solution. Well, to be honest, that was the presentation of the three, call it remote productions. Thanks for your attention. I tried to squeeze it within the 45 minutes and I succeeded quite well. So I would say, let's go back to Andreas and see if any questions popped up in the meantime.
Yes, thank you, Dirk. Very, very interesting presentation, and I believe you could have explained things in much, much more detail if we had just more time. So without further ado, I'll start the Q&A session, and I bring in Roland Hemming. Please, let's hear what questions have been collected during Dirk's presentation.
Yeah, I've got quite a few. Thanks, Dirk. It's a great presentation. What quite a few people want to know is, what is the end-to-end latency? I think they're referring primarily on the stadium project, but between stadium and control room, what sort of latency have you got there?
Well, those three projects have a complete different type of latency. That's quite clear. So the football story, the first one, is using J2K compression. That has one frame latency on the encoder and one frame on the decoder. So one frame is 40 milliseconds plus the network latency in between. So there, the latency of one way, so camera towards Brussels, is actually 2 frames plus network latency. So there I would say 2.5 frames of latency. Then of course you need to calculate also the compressed return feed to the stadium, which is again 2.5 frames of latency. So that means the camera guy in his vision, he will actually have a latency of up to 5 frames between the action that he's actually doing and the return video that he will see on his camera, which is quite high. In the beginning, the camera people were complaining about that, but in the end, they got used to it. And it is important to mention that this solution was installed for the 2nd division. Yeah. So the customer actually agreed with those boundaries of the project. With the link between, in the 2nd project, there was a link between Luxembourg and Brussels. There we used VC2 compression, and that compression method only uses 20 video lines of latency for encoding and decoding altogether. So that means that the only latency there is the physical transport of the light between Brussels and Luxembourg. So that's virtually nothing. And we did a test by sending a video between Luxembourg and Brussels, then actually operating it in the video switcher and everything, and then feeding it back. And the complete latency was 1 video frame of up and down altogether. And then the last story, which is DPG media, there is no compression involved whatsoever. But also there we measured the same latency. Why? Because you have the network latency in between, latency of the switches. And then of course the video switcher needs to buffer to the next full frame. So actually, to be very honest, if you would go with raw video or with VC2 compression, there is no difference in the end for the user. Of course, with J2K, there is.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Where do we go to next? The generation of PTP from the incoming stream, is that a feature of the VRemote, and is it stable?
Yes, exactly. So that's on in the first case study of the football stadiums. There we are able to receive a multicast, being it a video multicast or even just a black, can be a black as well. So you don't consume any, you don't consume any bandwidth. And then actually based on that incoming multicast, it is possible to regenerate a local clock and a local word clock video ref, and also use that local clock to regenerate PTP. So that indeed is a feature that we implemented, and it was actually implemented especially for that reason. It's a feature that we implemented in the VRemote. Okay. It is running pretty stable. I mean, they run even now after 4 years, they run on a weekly basis that infrastructure, and they use that as a clock solution.
Yeah, so let me ask an additional question to that. Since you transported PTP in the other 2 projects across the network, did you experience any difficulties there? And did you have to take any provisions or any measures to, assign higher quality to the PTP packets? And how did you do that on the bind?
So actually, on one project, so the project from the European Council, there we experienced difficulties because we had, like explained, the asymmetrical connection. Mm-hmm. On the story from DPG Media, it was a symmetrical connection, and to be honest, it's like direct fiber almost, 400 gig. So there we did not experience any issues. On the story of the European Council, we experienced difficulties by doing that. Not only we experienced those difficulties, also, for instance, the Bolero antennas from Riedel, they would not lock on the signal in Luxembourg because they noticed that there was like some issue. In the end, we found out that there was a hurdle with that asymmetrical connection. And what we did, we still used the normal boundary clock, However, both on the Riedel side and on the Lawo side, we increased the parameters in our edge devices that they would not be that strict with the single delay request of the P2P messages.
With the resulting P2P of this, and yeah, very good.
And the MPLS network was giving a. Sorry, I'm just trying to read this now. Was giving a layer 2. Was it layer 2 or layer 3?
Layer 3. Yeah, full layer 3.
Okay. And
I'll quickly jump on that question. So what we actually did, we installed every stadium had its own dedicated private network, call it like that, their own VLAN. So it was, for that reason, completely protected on layer 3. So it was impossible to just openly connect to different stadiums or even from the stadium to Brussels. So everything was layer 3, fully routed and well protected.
Okay. And were you using ST22-7 for anything?
Yes. So on the football stadium, not. Purely because of budget reasons. That was really like the low budget, easy install. So that was just a single 1 gig connection where we were using the J2K video streams and the RAVENNA audio streams. Then on the European Council and the DPG media story, that is fully based on 2022-7 redundancy, so going over the red and a blue network, with below that for the European Council VC2 as a video stream format, plus 32 channel audio streams for the transportation of all the languages in those rooms. And then for the DPG media story, it's also full redundant 2022-7. And we did quite extensive tests with that. We even at a certain period during the tests, we just unplugged the complete core switch. The complete spine was being pulled out, just power out, and to really check that everything kept on working.
Cool. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
One other question: how did you set up forward error correction to do with packet loss over the WAN?
There is no forward error correction used. The important message there is that if you start using forward error correction, then of course you have additional latency, which we chose not to do. So I mentioned during the explanation of the football stadiums that we do have packet loss from time to time in that MPLS network, and it's a logical result because of the physical let's call the physics of that network. I mean, it's an MPLS network, so it will reroute permanently the packages. And of course, if you have a multicast, which is then being rerouted into a different path, at that point in time, you will have packet loss. Now, because on the receiver side, we have a quite high buffer on the incoming streams, plus we are using the J2K compression. The funny thing is that in the end result on the video image, we did not see or we do not see interruptions in the video.
Is that due to the J2K, how the J2K compression works, or is that some further algorithms implemented into the VRemote?
No, it's purely, and there, frankly, we were just quite lucky that the J2K decoder could handle it.
Cool.
On the audio side, we do experience disturbance.
Sure.
So there we experience like this metal side effect that the voices are becoming a bit metal. Now, of course, it's not during the whole game. It's only during a reroute, which typically takes like a few seconds. And during those few seconds, you will hear a metallic audio disruption on the audio streams.
Very good.
Okay, that's great. One final question, Andreas, where do we get more information, and when's the next webinar?
Absolutely. More answers you can find, as always, on the RAVENNA website. We have a huge resources section. Of course, this presentation, the recording of this presentation slides will be made available there as well in 1 or 2 days. And of course, Lawo has very extensive material on their webpage, lawo.com. And yes, next presentation, that will be the final one before Christmas, the final one in our RAVENNA 2020 remote session series. RAVENNA will take it to the cloud. We will host a live intercontinental remote production demonstration utilizing RAVENNA and Amazon cloud stations. So we will have that next Tuesday on 1500, as always. The session will be led by Ross Video, by Bill and Angelo from Ross Video, and Claudio Beckerfoss and Nicolas Sturmel, Direct Out Emerging, will participate in the live demonstration part. So please tune in next week again when we host our final webinar session for this year, and that sure will be very, very interesting and stunning as well. So that's it for today, actually. Thank you for everyone who stayed online with us, and hope to see you next week on our final webinar. Thank you and have a nice day. Thank you, Dirk, of course.